that is definitely no stranger to the broadcast is American Athletic Conference Commissioner Mike Aresco, who is here with us today in a very special Wake Up Call with Dan Tortora conversation. You're watching and listening on youtube.com and facebook.com, both /Wake Up Call DT, and you're listening worldwide on mixlr.com/Wake Up Call DT and on wakeupcalldt.com. Mr. Aresco, how are we doing?
How are you, Dan? I see the bright sun. You know, it's definitely a wake up. I don't think I was up early enough to see the sunrise, but nevertheless, it looks great. No, great to be with you, Dan, as usual. It's been a little while since you and I have had a chance to talk. Been a busy time. We're getting ready for annual meetings. You know, you've seen that all the conferences are having their annual meetings around now, and it's been pretty busy, but you know, everything's fine. Thank you.
So, I mean, to kind of just jump right into that, what are the talking points of this year when it comes to the annual meetings? What's on the docket that you can let us know as far as, you know, what the focus is? Because there's a lot of things going on with collegiate athletics, but on top of all that, there's those going out and those coming in to the American Athletic Conference. So what are the annual meetings really going to center around for you?
It's a really good question, Dan. Well, we have our normal business where, you know, we go through scheduling. We have to think about the future. We don't know yet when the 3 exiting schools are going to go because we haven't worked out a settlement yet, and we may not. But we're talking about future football and basketball scheduling. We are looking at various officiating issues. We always have a review of our budget and our finances, which have been very healthy in this league, even with the pandemic. So those kinds of things have to be addressed. But this year, when we have our joint session with our presidents and ADs, we'll probably focus more on what I call global issues, and that is, you know, the transformation committee's work, where's college sports going, NIL, the transfer portal, and also should FBS football be separate from the NCAA? What's the future of the NCAA? How should the enforcement function be handled? I mean, those are pretty significant issues. You know what's going on in college sports right now. I think the Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher thing is it's good entertainment and all, but the issue is the issue. I mean, it is pay for play right now. I mean, it's just a different form of pay for play, and we all kind of know it. And that, you know, is one of the things that we're trying to tackle. No pun intended. So the agenda is really going to focus on once we get into our overall discussion. Where do we want to be on this? Where do we think it's going? You know, are we going to accept some form of pay for play? You know, there's another movement afoot, of course, that, to pay players, officially, California, they didn't pass a law saying that a certain percentage of money had to go to players. It ended up dying, but it could come back next year. And the other issue, of course, is unionization. You know, there are some states that want to see college athletes unionized. Is there some way we can collectively, get together and maybe work with Congress or, and avoid lawsuits and try to work out something collectively without making our student athletes employees and without, creating unions, which cause all sorts of issues. That's another issue that we're going to be talking about. Where do we want to be? Where as a conference do we want to be on this? As commissioner, I have my own ideas, but, you don't want to be ahead of your group. You don't want to be going out there and talking about things that they're not comfortable with or that they don't agree with. So we'll have some pretty, imagine we'll have some pretty great discussions. Now we have Troy Dannon, one of our ADs, is on the NCAA Transformation Committee. And I'm sure you probably talked about it with your listeners and viewers. But that's really where we are, and that's what will be discussed.
Yeah, and all of these things that are going on right now with the NCAA, it's interesting what you said, because I made a statement about 5 years ago on the show, and I said 5 to 10 years from now, so we're right here at that window. I said if the NCAA keeps going the way it's going, we will either not know them the way that we used to know them because they'll look different, or they may not exist at all. You just talked about the FBS. Does it even need to be a part of the NCAA? What are your thoughts on that? I mean, Mark Emmert is going to be stepping down shortly as president of the NCAA. He said during the pandemic that he has no control. There is no czar of football. He essentially rendered himself powerless to college football. And to fans, they think, okay, well, if it's the NCAA Division I, II, and III, then it's under the NCAA, obviously, because that's what it says. It says NCAA D1, 2, and 3. Well, he said, I can't tell a conference or a school whether or not they can play. And people kind of took a step back and said, well, what does that mean? So where is college football right now? And do you see it functioning outside of the NCAA?
It seems, Dan, that there's a fairly, I don't know if it's strong yet, but a growing movement in that direction. The idea that if football really is a different, animal, it just is. It's just different. In terms of the amount of revenue it brings in terms of the impact it has, in terms of the, what goes into it. And I think the feeling is growing that maybe football just needs to be separate. That FBS, for example, needs to be separate. FBS needs to set its own rules without having to worry about input from those who may not really experience what we experience, or who don't have the same issues. And this is where I don't see, Dan, a break off of the 5 conferences, for example. And you could argue now it's the big 2, right? Or you could argue 4. You could argue a lot of things, right? You could argue 6, that we should be there too. But the point is, it's FBS. And I think in the room, there's a cohesiveness about FBS. No matter what FBS conference you're in, you share the same issues that the others. Yes, the Big Ten and SEC have more money, but they play the same brand of football we do. They're student athletes. We had 2 first-round draft picks this year, right? One so-called P5 conference didn't have any. We had 10 draft picks in the first 3 rounds. There were a couple of P5 conferences that only had 7. We play the same brand of football. We have the same issues. And even though we don't generate as much revenue, we generate a lot of revenue, and it's just different. It's different than Division I. And as chair of the Conference Commissioners Association, I see the difference in those meetings. Now, I'm not necessarily campaigning for this at this point, but sitting in the room with the commissioners and talking about this, you can just get a feeling that maybe it's something that's going to get a pretty fair hearing. The other issue is, okay, well, then what do you do with basketball? What do you do with Olympic sports? What do you do with enforcement? The NCAA operationally does a very good job with those events and could continue to do that. The NCAA seems to have kind of abandoned a lot of the areas that it used to get involved in, and it's clear we're all pretty, I wouldn't say paranoid, but we're all worried about antitrust, and we've got to deal with that. And one of the ways you deal with it is to deregulate and let things devolve to the conferences and to the schools as much as you can. But what you don't want is Wild West. And there's a balancing act, and is Congress ultimately going to get involved? I've been pretty skeptical, but it's always possible that, you got an election coming in the fall. And once that's over with, you never know. You might be able to, but I think we're the ones that have to come up with the plan. I think that's why these annual meetings for a lot of conferences, and definitely for ours, are more important than they've been in terms of the global issues. We have to drive it. And then I think try to engage Congress rather than say, Congress, you handle it. You deal with it. Well, they're not going to on their own, or they're going to want to control college sports, which I don't think is a good thing for anyone. So that's where I see it going. I think there's going to be a robust, I know that term's overworked, but there'll be a robust discussion about what's going to happen with FBS football, but also NIL and the transfer portal, more of the year in residency going away, have created a perfect storm. How are you going to get your hands around that if you ever are? I mean, it's pay for play. Now, these new rules, that say donors can't have contact. Well, you take a pretty dumb donor to get ensnared in that now, right? The donor don't have to do anything. All I have to do is contribute the money to the collective. And the coach can say to the player, look, you come to our school, you're going to do great. We got a great collective. We've got people that, want to do NIL deals, and there's, what's to stop them from doing that? And so I'm not really sure that there's any enforcement anymore about this. And it is clearly pay for play. Is there some way you can have a fair market value attached to these so-called endorsement deals that might limit some of the real tremendous abuse with payments that have nothing to do with NIL. I'll close this part of the segment, Dan, by saying I'm not even sure we should be talking about NIL anymore. I'm not sure it is NIL. NIL is when you try to leverage your name, image, and likeness, which very few student athletes can do, even in their own communities. People don't know who they are, but that's fine if they can. And we probably should have loosened that up years ago, even though we were worried about the abuses that could follow, right? The $10,000 autograph or the whatever. So we didn't loosen things up. We probably should have. But now the question becomes, well, why are we even calling it NIL? This has nothing to do with NIL. It has to do with recruiting and retention. So, okay, let's say you develop some way to collectively deal with paying players or however you want to do it. And that's the other thing. You got to decide whether you really are going to embrace paying players. But let's assume you can figure out something. Well, NIL is still out there separately. It's not going away. And so you're going to have money coming from different directions, and where does it end? Now, I know some of the coaches have said this isn't sustainable. I don't necessarily buy that. I think it is sustainable. If these donors want to keep collectives going year after year, why can't they? The money maybe used to go to facilities and to other things and to nutritional programs and to Olympic sports and to, fields and scoreboards and everything you can imagine. That money now may just go to recruiting players, by virtue of NIL deals. I don't know. Maybe the money will still flow in even greater numbers, and will fans embrace this, Dan? I don't know. I have no idea. You talk to fans. Your show appeals to fans. I don't know how they're going to view all this, and you're not going to know in a year or two. I mean, this is a long-term kind of thing, right?
Yeah, and I think. You bring up great points, and two things I want to get to: NIL and transfer portal, and what that's doing to the American athletic, what it's doing to college athletics in general, creating the fact that you can go and you can go to any team you want. You don't have to sit out a year. You can go in conference. You can leave Tulane and go to Tulsa. You can leave Navy and go over to Memphis. I mean, it's the control used to be with the coaches. Now that control has moved to the players, but it's two extremes, right? We've gone from one extreme to another. We've gone from not giving student athletes any money to now they could sign an endorsement deal for $1 million. And what does that do? And what does that mean? And who regulates that? And are they paying taxes on it? And who's helping them with that? So there's a lot of questions. And you brought up Nick Saban and Jimbo Fisher. I know that the SEC had reprimanded both. How would you handle this as a commissioner if one of your coaches publicly defamed another coach and accused them of something that broke not only college athletic laws, but also state laws? Would you allow the other coach to defend themselves? Do you bring them both into a room? I mean, what do you do in a situation? Because this is a unique situation that we're seeing, but they both got reprimanded. And in my, I've interviewed them both. I've been around Nick Saban. I've been around Jimbo Fisher. In my world, if I was Jimbo, I would have felt like I should at least say something in defense of myself. How do you handle that?
Well, and I'm not giving advice, to people. You could argue, I suppose, that Nick didn't, accuse anybody of doing anything illegal, but he took a shot at A&M, which may or may not have been accurate. Okay, you may recall years ago, Rick Barnes and Dean Smith were kind of getting into it, and Gene Corrigan called them both in and had a face-to-face meeting with them. If that happened in my conference, and fortunately it hasn't happened, I would probably be inclined, just me, to bring them in, to bring them both in and say, look, Commissioner, I want to talk to both of you. Let's see if we can't, work this out. You want comedy if possible. You want collegiality, no pun intended, if possible. You don't want these things to escalate, and my guess is they won't. We'd have to look at our sportsmanship. We have sportsmanship rules, and I don't know whether this. I haven't really looked at that part of it as to whether we'd be issuing reprimands or anything of that nature. It would depend on the facts. You know, you never know what the fact situation is. This one, it's really up to the SEC. This isn't really our business. It's really up to the SEC. But I remember Gene did do that, and I think it probably did calm things down. But I'm not, you know, I can't give advice, and every conference is different. Every conference has a different dynamic, you know. Conferences have had scheduling issues between schools. Remember some of those hurricane pre-schedulings, you know. We did it a certain way. Other conferences had to do it a certain way. So there's always a difference. But again, I think that's almost a sideshow in terms of what's really going on, because the real issues are, how do you deal with this Wild West? And by the way, the Wild West may have had more protocols than we have now. I mean, they may have had some unwritten rules that everybody abided by. You know, I don't know. We don't have anything right now. Again, I think that, there's that old saying, if something can't continue, it won't. And this is sustainable in terms of the money flowing in. But the model might not really be sustainable in the sense that something's got to give. We've got to get a handle on this. Everybody wants to get a handle on this. And I'm not out there accusing kids of being greedy and all. And if you've got this system,
yeah,
and you're a student athlete, young kid, why wouldn't you take advantage of it, right? The problem is you don't want it to be corrupting, though. This is, we never really won the PR battle. Dan, and when I say PR battle, these kids get a full scholarship. They get out debt free. To get a really good college education, if you care about that, and if it sets you up for life, you get contacts in your community that you would never have had otherwise. You get the benefit of these great stadiums, great coaching. Some will make the pros, most won't. But you also get cost of attendance now. You get counseling. You get nutritional programs that would be the envy of any student on campus. You get all sorts of benefits that we've never really articulated. On top of this now, this notion that you're almost like an employee, right? This is voluntary in the sense that you could go to a G League, right? You could go to I think some of these new football leagues will probably take kids right away, right? I don't know. You don't have to do this. And so I think we lost that battle. We couldn't convince people that this was a good deal for student athletes, that they weren't exploited.
Yeah.
The billions had something to do with it. There's a lot of money floating around, but a lot of it gets plowed right back in to all the things you need, the facilities and everything else. The other thing, Dan, the last thing on this one is the issue of coaching salaries has been our Achilles heel, and they're moving. The fact that they can move, kids couldn't. They get all this money. ADs, commissioners now make more than they used to, and everybody says, well, wait, the kids aren't getting any money. They're the ones doing this. Well, maybe I'm from an archaic era. I grew up, I played high school football, and you did it for the love of the game, your school, participating. Just the idea that you could participate and make a team and do this was terrific. Maybe that's really an archaic notion now. But the truth is, things have changed dramatically, and we're going to have to either adapt. Either you're going to have some kind of modified pay-for-play model, which is loosely tethered to education, or some schools, Jack Swarbrick talked about this. I mean, we've been talking about it for months, really. I remember talking about it with Mark Emmert, what's going to happen months ago, what's going to happen. Some schools may want to really embrace the amateur model and probably could do it if their student athletes wanted them to do it. Others would have to move toward this modified pay-for-play. The only issue right now is, can you put some work? Can you organize it? Can you put some, rules in there that make some sense and avoid getting sued all the time? That's why I've been skeptical about Congress. But on the other hand, I do think that Congress might have a role if we take the initiative and come up with reasonable pro-competitive rules that maybe on their own could withstand antitrust scrutiny, but also get the help of Congress. We'll see. You have an election coming up, and I think before an election, very little gets done, as you know. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, and 2 quick points here. One coming off of what you just said. To take a look at where we stand in all of this, there was a question that was asked, did anybody see this coming? Did anybody think it was going to be this bad? And I very easily raised my hand, and I've been talking about this with you, and I've been talking about this on the show since the beginning of it all. It's not whether or not you should find a way to do right by the student athletes. It's the fact that there has been no rules and no regulations and very little to keep this from being free agency and pay for play. Why are people surprised that this is a giant you know what show? I mean, I don't understand why people are going, wait a minute, how come it didn't just figure itself out?
Yeah, no one should be surprised at all. In fact, several years ago in conference commissioner meetings, we were talking about this very thing. When California passed that law, we knew that it could lead to chaos. And not just because 50 states would all jump in and have their own laws, but we knew at the time that this would become a recruiting tool, a retention tool, that it wasn't really NIL. Because the truth is, how many student athletes, especially football players, have the ability to cash in on NIL? Maybe Trevor Lawrence when he was playing, maybe a few other guys. How many can even name some of these top players? How many can name a top wide receiver? How many can name any lineman at all or a defensive back? How many people can name even a star quarterback? Even a Heisman Trophy winner, a lot of people can't necessarily name. Okay, they have some value in NIL, but it's not what's going on now. We all predicted this. This is a very obvious result of what has happened. Not a surprise at all. The question is, it happened quickly? Yeah, that's not a surprise either, because, donors were just, chomping at the bit. They want to have good teams, right? They want to get the best players. They figured out quickly. Now, maybe what we didn't see is the collectives forming so quickly, right? That was something that happened very quickly.
Yeah.
Maybe we didn't see this going to pay for play immediately, although, to be honest, that was probably predictable. I'm not sure there's any part of this that we didn't, necessarily, foresee. Other than the collectives, which formed very quickly, I'm not sure anything is surprising, Dan.
Final note here, two things that I imagine may be a part of the annual meetings. Teams going in, like you talked about, you got 3 full members going out, you got 6 coming in. What is the hopeful timetable of either the going ins or either the coming ins or the going outs? And then we've seen schools looking at dissolving divisions and changing to different models. What is the model? So what's the timetable for the teams going out and coming in? And once those teams come in, you're going to have 14-member football schools. What is your thought on how you're going to handle scheduling?
Well, right now, Dan, we'd be very happy if the 3 stayed right through July 1, 24, which is what our bylaws require, and that was the notice that they gave us, that they'd be there until then, unless there was some kind of mutually agreeable early exit. Mm-hmm. So we, in good faith, have been negotiating with them to see if there is a way where they could exit in 23, but we'd have to get, the compensation that we require in order for that to happen. And so far, it hadn't happened. So I'm not sure what the timetable is, but we know it's either 23 or 24. The schools coming in know that they're not, likelihood not coming in until the others leave. We made it clear that they have no right to come in before the others leave, but it's all been amicable. We tell them, okay, this is what we think is going to happen. So that part's up in the air, and the timetable, we hope to get this resolved over the next several weeks or months. But, again, if we can't get it resolved, then the others just stay till July 1, 24. I mean, our bylaws are very clear, and we would look to enforce them. In terms of divisions, I think you'll probably see us abandon divisions. We haven't had them, obviously, for a couple of years because we've been playing with 11 teams in the absence of UConn, and we got a waiver from the NCAA for a few years to play with 11 teams, not have a round robin, and play our 2 best teams in the championship game, the teams with the best conference percentage win-loss record. So at this point, it doesn't make a lot of sense for us to go back to divisions. And the reason is you want to have your 2 best teams playing in the championship game, especially with the college football playoff very likely to expand, very likely to include the top 6 conference champions. But you don't want to risk as a team from another division with 3 losses defeating your undefeated team in the championship game. You'd rather have, or a 1-loss team. But more than that, we think that if we don't have divisions, we have more scheduling flexibility to make sure everybody's playing each other on a regular basis. You know, we're going to be at 14 at some point, you know, whether it's this year or next year, and or 2023 or 24, excuse me. And so we know that we're looking at 14 and how you work that out. We'll probably stick with an 8-game conference schedule. It makes sense for us because we really need those 4 non-conference games. It's really important to continue to build our league. And, you know, we're under no illusions, Dan. We've separated ourselves from the G4 we belong with the others. But we've got to rebuild to the extent that we're losing 3 important schools. We're adding some really good schools with some good programs, especially in football drives everything, as you know. But we also have some good basketball coming in. And we have some good incumbent schools. What people forget sometimes is that it hasn't just been, you know, in fact, Houston hadn't even been on the radar until this year for several years. You know, after 2016, they kind of fell off a bit. Every school in our conference has done pretty well, has had their moments. You know, Temple had several really good years under Matt Rule and Jeff Collins. You know, East Carolina was probably our best team in the early going, but didn't necessarily, you know, they lost some close games. They had the great Shane Carden at quarterback, and they were a top team. You know, USF had some tremendous years with Willie Taggart and Charlie his very first year, and then things fell off. But, you know, you look at Tulsa's been in a championship game, has had multiple 10-win seasons. SMU, both the last 4 years under Sonny, has made great strides. Memphis went to the Cotton Bowl. Memphis was a huge program the whole decade. You know, they were the rivals of UCF, and they played in the championship games. They played against Cincinnati in the championship games and won and went to the Cotton Bowl. You know, so everybody, you look at Tulane, they went to 3 straight bowls until this year, and they hadn't done that in a long time. So every school in our conference has contributed. Temple's been, as I said, Navy, I think it's been ranked since they joined our conference in 2015, 28 times in different rankings, you know, during a season, you know, and prior to that, virtually not at all for really a decade or more. So we've got a good nucleus to build on, but again, you're losing 3 important schools. Right. And who's arguing that? They've accounted for 5 of our last 6 New Year's Day games. So we've got some work to do, but we'll do it. And the DNA of this conference hasn't changed one bit. We'll probably be even more aggressive on the P6. I think we were ready, as you know, we wrote that letter to the commissioners, and I thought it was a strong letter. And I think we were right there on the cusp, ready to go try to get legislation, maybe even go beyond that. And then, you know, the floor caved a little bit because of the Texas-Oklahoma earthquake. And we'll regroup. This meeting's important because we will have our new schools at this meeting, and we'll be able to talk strategy long-term and what we think we need to do. But our schools are going to have to invest at an even greater level. And then finally, in closing, Dan, the wild card is now this NIL transfer portal business. I think under the old system, we did very well. You know, we got some great kids. We developed them. They were reluctant to transfer because they have to sit out a year. And it made kids think hard about, you know, why they're at a place, you know, what the future is, loyalty. The coaching issue was an issue. It seemed to me we probably could have put in a rule that if coaches left, kids can leave, right? Maybe they have to spend that year in residency, but if coaches leave, the kids can leave because they didn't go there thinking they would be playing for a different coach. And maybe you would have a rule that said coaches couldn't take new jobs until the season was over. And that way you'd prevent all this nonsense about teams without coaches going into bowl games and playing the end of the season with a lot of turmoil. That's something maybe we could have done. We didn't do it, and we're in the drink now. But I think in the end, that's another thing we've got to kind of get our arms around, get a handle on. And I don't know how this is all going to affect our conference because, like you say, you develop these players, they can just go across the street, they can be recruited, even though, you know, you're starting to see tampering charges now. I don't know if they're true or not. I'm not going to make any accusations against anybody, but you know, it's going to be harder, I think, for us to do what we did the last decade. I mean, think about what this conference did. 7 out of 9 New Year's days, right? Made the playoff, had probably 3 or 4 teams that were playoff worthy, but didn't have that opportunity. Would have made it 7 of 9 years if you had the new system in place, right? Might have even had a shot because a committee decides it. 2014, maybe Memphis would have been chosen, you know, because a committee would have been deciding it, you know. Who knows? Point is, we've had a great decade. but we've got real challenges ahead. And you hit it right on the head. These the NIL, the transfer portal. We will have to make the decision on divisions. We'll probably make it our annual meeting next week. And the timetable for the other three is still totally up in the air.
Yeah, which puts us in a place of, knowing that this future is coming at some point and the branding's coming here at some point in the annual meeting. Like you said, the new schools will be a part of it. So do you have everybody there, or does Cincinnati, Houston, and UCF, do they not? Okay.
Yeah, no, they don't participate in meetings like this. We've been great to them. We've included them in a ton of things where we didn't even have to. With our bylaws, Dan, once you declare you're leaving, you don't go to meetings anymore. And there's a reason for that. You're going to be in a competing conference. And we talk about strategy and we talk about long term. You don't want to share that with essentially another conference, and they know that, and that's why we do it the way we do it. We've never had an issue with anybody in the past. We don't say they can't compete in our championships. We welcome that. The only issue we've had is that they're not. If a championship was slated for one of their places, we could move it somewhere else. Sometimes we just leave it there. Point is, we have strict bylaws, but we have been very, very open. If they have questions, our staff has reached out to them. We treat their student athletes the same as we treat anybody else. We don't want them to feel in any way that they're not being treated the same. All this nonsense officiating, it's absolutely no issue at all. I went to Cincinnati and I loved the experience, and I was proud of what they've done, and I'm proud of what these three have done for our league. I'm proud of what the league's done for them. Their fans were great to me when I was in Cincinnati. You try to, it's a balancing act, Dan. They're leaving, but on the other hand, you want to include them in as much as you can, but they're not included in these kinds of meetings. Now, they were just at the Big 12 meeting. So, they're obviously going to be integrated into that situation fairly soon. So anyway, that's how we work it. And we'll have the 6 new schools with us. It'll be an interesting first time we've really had them all together. First time we've had a face-to-face meeting since the pandemic. It's all been virtual. It's all been Zoom like this. Yeah. But, should be a good week.
Yeah, future bright. UTSA, UAB, Rice, North Texas, FAU, all these teams that are coming in here, and to see what this future in Charlotte as well, to see what they're going to bring to the table. And I've been to a lot of these cities. I've been to a lot of these places. I know that there's a lot of good coming into this conference, and a lot of great, very fertile ground coming in as well. So excited to see what's going to happen from here. And always, Mike, I appreciate talking with you. I appreciate how candid you are and how open you are with information here, and that you really allow it all to be out here on the table. So thank you for what you do with the American Athletic Conference. Thank you for what you're doing to juggle the collegiate athletic world that we live in today. And I appreciate you as always. I look forward to hopefully getting to see you soon.
Well, thanks, Dan. It's not what we signed up for, that's for sure. It's a little different. On the other hand, you're right about the schools coming in, and we have a strong presence in Texas. We'll have an even stronger presence. These are in football hotbeds, and they also bring some very good basketball. Thanks again for having me, Dan. Always a pleasure, because your knowledge and your interest in our conference, always a pleasure to talk to you. And I hope you have a great Memorial Day weekend. I almost forget that's coming up because our meetings start right after that. But have a great holiday. And again, always appreciate you having me and the interest you show in our conference and your knowledge generally of the collegiate landscape. So thanks again. Appreciate it.
Thank you for that. You and I both know that we celebrate holidays, but we also work. So happy Memorial Day to you too.
Thanks, Dan. Hang in there. Take care.